So in this video, I want to take a look at the clip attention multiply node that you may have seen in a couple of my previous videos. In those videos, I set the values to 1, so that way they were effectively doing nothing, because if you multiply anything times 1, it's just itself. So in those videos, the clip attention multiply node was effectively not there. However, I've found this node to be particularly helpful, especially in generating images with text in them. So I wanted to take a close look at them in this video so you can get a better idea of how it works and be able to use it in your own workflows. Now, in the last video I did on my updated Flux workflow, this node is in that workflow and it already does have the values set to the values I typically keep mine at. And for the most part, I generally don't mess with those values. So you're totally fine to just leave those values as they are for pretty much any type of image you are looking to generate, at least in my experience. However, for those of you out there who like to actually understand things rather than just being told what settings to use, I wanted to take a little closer look at the node and some examples of what happens when we change these values. Now, if you ask your favorite chatbot to explain the clip attention multiply node, you're going to get an answer like this. You can see I've asked it to explain the parameters of the node and what effects these parameters have on the image generation process. And the answer it gives us is that this node is used to adjust the attention mechanism in the clip model, which can influence the quality and characteristics of the generated image. So the Q, or query parameter, adjusts the weight of the query vectors, as you might imagine, causing the model to pay more attention to specific parts of the input, potentially enhancing detail in those areas. The key parameter modifies the weight of the key vectors, affecting how the model matches the query vectors to the key vectors, influencing the overall coherence and structure of the generated images. And the value parameter changes the weight of the value vectors, affecting the features extracted by the model, potentially making certain aspects of the image more pronounced. And finally, the out, or output parameter, controls the weight of the output vectors, affecting the overall quality and style of the generated image. Now, for the real nerds out there who want to know more about the underlying mechanics of how the math actually works in regards to attention mechanisms, I would highly suggest this channel here, Hedu AI, which hopefully I'm pronouncing correctly, because she has a 3-part series that breaks this down very well. And some time ago, whenever I was dissecting the 2017 Attention is All You Need paper in an attempt to code up one of these transformer models myself from scratch, I stumbled across this 3-part series, and it went a long way to helping me complete that code. So these are the 3 videos here in the series, and as you can see, this second video here is the one that specifically deals with attention mechanisms. She has really concise slides that visualize the mathematics behind this very well. So if you would like to know exactly how that works, I would definitely recommend checking that out. However, for our purposes in Comfy UI, I think it's sufficient to tweak these parameters a little bit and see what the effect on the output images is. So first of all, let's start by setting all of the values to 1. And you can see I have a prompt in here from a thumbnail that I was generating earlier, and we'll just go with that. As usual, we are using the Vit14 clip model to help with text in our image. We of course have our Sarge nodes here, and we're using the Flux NF4 model to generate a 1024 by 1024 image, and batch size 2, so we'll produce 2 of them. If this workflow looks a little bit unfamiliar, I would definitely recommend checking out my last video about my updated Flux workflow. Of course, I will leave a link in the description. This new workflow has some nodes that allow us to tidy things up, and it makes things look a lot neater and cleaner, so we don't have a bunch of extra nodes cluttering up the space. So let's go ahead and run this prompt. With our clip attention multiply values all set to 1, this is the output we get. And as you can see, in both cases, the output is incorrect. In the first image, we did get the correct text, find inner peace, and flow state on the monk's robes. However, he's not levitating, clearly. On the second image, we did get find inner peace, and the monk is levitating. However, the text on his robe is incorrect. So let's try tweaking some of these parameters and see if we can correct this. First of all, let's just try setting our query value to 2 and see what that does. Yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. Jacob fucking Jones is quite the cool cat. And not really much change at all here. The first image is basically the same, slightly different style on the text, and in the second image our text is even more incorrect than it was before. So let's try setting that back to 1 and setting our value parameter to 2. Now in my experience what I found is that adjusting the Q and K parameters tends to produce the exact same outcome, so I'm going to just skip the K and go straight to adjusting this value parameter. And what we can see is that by adjusting the value parameter we get significant differences in our images. Both of the monks are now facing completely different directions, and in the case of the second image we do find much better text, although we do have the word peace repeated here, but overall it is still better than what it was. So finally let's set this back to 1 and adjust our output parameter. And now we have our monks back facing the directions they were facing. The text is nearly the same as it was on the left, and the text in the right image is now who knows what that is. So let's try one more experiment where we significantly increase the output parameter. Let's bump this up to 8. And what we can see from this is that we do get significantly better results. On the left image, nothing much has changed, but everything was already correct when this was set to 1, so there really was nothing to change. On the right image, we still don't have the correct text, but the text that we do have is correct. So what exactly can we take away from this? Well, after running this thousands of times with different parameters, I would summarize these parameters by saying that increasing any of them is going to result in more realism in your output image. And that's especially the case for the value parameter. Not to say that that increases the quality of the output image, but that it makes things look more realistic. Now, this might not always be a good thing. For example, in one image, I was attempting to generate a cyberpunk cheeseburger, and obviously that's not a real thing, so I don't want it to look more realistic. The more it looks more like a real cheeseburger, the less it looks cyberpunk. In that image, whenever I had all of my values set to 1, I got a cheeseburger with some neon lights and other things that you wouldn't normally see on a cheeseburger, obviously. And as I increased this value parameter, the neon lights and other cyberpunk effects started to be removed from the cheeseburger, and it started to look more like just a normal cheeseburger, which in that case, that was not desirable. So more realism doesn't exactly mean that you're going to get what you want. As I said before, adjusting the Q and the K parameters tends to produce the exact same results. So if I were to set Q to 2, or if I were to set K to 2, the results in the output image would be the same. And in either case, what you're going to find is that the model tends to pay more attention to what you have in your prompt. So adjusting the Q or the K parameters is similar to adjusting the guidance or CFG on your sampler, in that it will adhere more strictly to what you have requested in your prompt. And finally, for the output value, what I've noticed is that this tends to produce a better quality in your output image, meaning that there are fewer aberrations or artifacts or blurring in the output image. So just to recap, the Q and the K values are similar to your CFG or your guidance. It's going to cause your model to adhere more strictly to the text prompt you have given it. The V parameter is going to cause more realism in the output image, which again may or may not be a good thing depending on the type of image you're trying to produce. And the output parameter is going to increase the quality of the output image, resulting in less blurring and fewer artifacts. And in terms of how much you would want to adjust any of these parameters, what I found is that the Q, K, and V parameters are quite sensitive. So adjusting them just slightly produces significant differences in your results. whereas the output parameter is far less sensitive, meaning you can actually crank this value up a lot, although the max value you can put into this field is 10. So if you try to put a number higher than 10, it will just adjust it back to 10. And if you get my workflow over from Patreon, what you'll see is that I have the Q and K parameters set to 0.9, I have the V parameter set to 1.4, and I have the output parameter set to 8.4. And that's because I wanted the model to be slightly more creative, slightly more realistic, and produce a really high quality image. So by setting the Q and the K parameter to 0.9, that gives it a little bit more liberty to be creative in what it generates. By setting the V parameter to slightly above 1, that's going to produce a little bit more realism. And then by cranking the output value up to 8 or so, that's going to significantly enhance the quality of the output image. So right around there is where I tend to have my settings for my clip attention node, and I found that that's a good mixture of these parameters to get images that are creative and realistic and very high quality. Again, you could just get my workflow and the settings will already be dialed in to give you good results. But if you're the type of person who likes to play around with things and figure out what works best for you, hopefully this video will give you a good basis for how to think about this node and these different parameters and what adjusting each one of them is going to do in your output image. So that's all I got for this one. As always, I would like to hear from you about this. If you end up playing around with these parameters and come up with some other useful insights, be sure to leave those in the comments. As I mentioned in my previous video about the updated Flux workflow, I spent the better half of today working on some thumbnails and logos and channel banners for my cousin's gaming channel, and ended up coming up with some really cool results, which I'll be sharing in a video coming out tomorrow. So if you're looking to use Comfy to generate high quality thumbnails for your YouTube videos, be sure to check that out. And then I also have the next video in my PC build series coming out tomorrow as well. If you're not subscribed already, I would greatly appreciate it if you would go ahead and do that, and give the video a like if you found it useful. Also be sure to share this with anyone you know who might find it useful as well. Obviously that stuff helps me out a lot, so thank you guys for doing that. I'm gonna go ahead and get to work on those, and I will see you guys on the next one. Take care.